Welcome to Just One Thing for Parents, where we offer busy parents a bite-sized helpful tip for how to connect with and strengthen their relationship with their children. So today I have Dawn Huebner with me, who is an author of many books, including a series, mini books about mighty fears. She's also a parent coach and a particular expert on managing anxiety. So my question to you, Dawn, thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
And my question to you, what is the one thing you think is most helpful for parents to support an anxious child?
I'd say the one thing that parents can do to support their anxious child is to choreograph practice intentionally. So technically this is called exposure, doing the thing that you're afraid of or taking steps toward doing the thing that you're afraid of. That's called exposure. But the piece that I would recommend is having parents do that with their children on purpose, to not wait until the child is in an anxious moment and then, sort of frantically try to remember what are the strategies and how do I help my child, but instead to set up in advance the opportunity for a child to take steps and to explicitly practice what it is that makes them anxious.
Wow. Okay. So slightly different exposure, but doing it when it's not essential.
Correct.
Yeah. And when the emotions are not high. So not coming in with the strategies when everybody's in a state, but
That's right.
practicing little and often.
Right.
Yeah.
And the thing that makes that challenging, well, there are two things that make that challenging. One is just, people are busy and life gets in the way, and it's hard to add in one more thing about practicing, something that your child finds difficult. But I think even more than that is the fact that parents tend to think, why would I intentionally put my
Right.
child in a situation that I know is going to make them feel anxious? And I
Right.
think, we operate under this really misplaced or mistaken idea that kids need to be kept comfortable and that the
Mm.
goal is to avoid anxiety. And that's really not the goal. The goal is to learn to manage anxiety differently because, anxiety is going to happen and we
Yeah.
want to learn to respond to it differently. So, yes, you do intentionally try to trigger some anxiety in a titrated way, a little bit at a
Mm.
time to help kids learn how to manage it differently. And also, importantly, what we're trying to teach kids through exposure is that being afraid is different from being in danger, and that their fear is essentially a false alarm. And the only way they can really learn that at kind of a deep brain level is by being repeatedly exposed to the thing that makes them nervous and seeing that actually nothing bad happens. They're nervous, but there's nothing catastrophic or dangerous or painful or terrible that happens. And that's how kids learn that these are quote unquote false alarms and that they're afraid, but they're not in danger. And that leads to just a major shift in terms of how kids understand and respond to their own anxiety.
Wow. What's hidden in what you say there is also the idea that everybody has anxiety. Anxiety
Right.
is normal. And one of
Yes.
our jobs as parents is to help kids to manage anxiety.
Right.
And that some kids are way more anxious than others, aren't they? And
Yes.
that's just how it is.
Right. So some of that is genetic and some of it is learned. So, when people are anxious, they tend to avoid the things that make them anxious. And avoidance is tremendously reinforcing, right? You avoid the thing that you're
Yes.
anxious about and you feel better. So
Yes.
you feel driven to continue to avoid, and it becomes a learned response to avoid because that's the way that you feel better,
Yeah.
right? But avoidance can take on a life of its own, and anxiety snowballs, and avoidance in the long run is really not a very healthy or effective strategy. It begins to limit your life in pretty significant ways.
Yeah. Wow. So I wonder if you could just give a real life example for people.
Sure. So let's use an example about a phobia, something like a fear of bees. right? So one way of handling this, which is not the way that I recommend, would be to wait until your child is outside and encounters a bee and feels afraid and try to talk them out of their fear, try to reassure them or use logic with them or comfort them in some way, say the bee's not going to sting you or whatever. That is not likely to be very effective in the long run, right? So what I'm recommending is to have your child purposely practice either being outside, because often kids who are afraid of bees won't even go outside because they're afraid they're going to encounter a bee. Or if your child is already comfortably going outside, you would look for places where there are bees that are likely to exist.
Wow,
And
that's
you have
radical.
your child practice
Yeah.
watching the bees, getting closer and closer to the bees. And you can make it fun. You want to be creative in some way. So you can have a child go on a bee photo safari where you're challenging them to take pictures of bees, or you can do some kind of outdoor scavenger hunt and include places where there are likely to be bees. So, trash cans or things of that sort. You can have kids do experiments where they're leaving juice in little open containers outside and watching to see if bees come. So, you can make it interesting and fun for kids, but you're not fostering avoidance. You're doing the opposite of that. You're kind of intentionally courting the thing that your child normally avoids, and you're having them practice be in that situation.
Yeah. And presumably some kids will say, I don't want to, I don't want to, I don't want to, but we have to be strong, right? And push through.
We do. And, we can teach even very young kids about how our brains and our bodies are set up to help us get used to things. We can
Yeah.
get used to things that are uncomfortable for us or that are scary for us. And the way to do that is by intentionally doing those things. And so, there's no trickery. We don't try to kind of fool our kids into doing this. I think we can be really explicit about we're going to practice this because getting used to being outside or being around bees is a way that you'll get to enjoy being outside more, or being with your
Yeah.
friends, or doing the things our families want to do, right?
Yeah.
And it's okay to go in really small steps, right? So you wouldn't have a bee phobic child initially be within a couple inches of a bee, but you might have them look at bees from afar with binoculars, or use the camera on your phone and have them zoom in standing far away. And then gradually over time, you're having them get closer and closer and closer. So exposure is happens best when it's frequent and when it's progressive, meaning you're kind of taking small steps, but you're adding to those steps and making them a little bit more challenging and a little bit more challenging over time.
Yeah. Such incredible advice. And what an incredible accomplishment it would feel like for a child, and a great skill to
Absolutely.
give them for the rest of their life.
Right.
Anything that's frightening, I'll do it little and often, and I'm going to practice and I'm going to move towards it.
That's right. And the awareness of that working, or the experience of that working, generalizes. So kids eventually are able to recognize, okay, I did that with bees, and I did it for about going into my basement by myself. And, it sort of helps them to see that there's something that works broadly, that I can take little steps and get used to, whatever it is that I'm afraid of.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. You really are an expert in this field, and
Thanks.
that was so well explained, and I hope it's helpful for parents. And thanks so much for coming.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.